This is a chapter I've been wanting to do for quite a while: the government and the economy. What is the purpose of government? The very basic purpose of government. Well, the Bible says that the government is here to punish evil and to reward or to encourage good. For a classic Bible passage on the government, look for Romans 13, talks about that. Punish evil, reward or encourage good. Obviously, a big part of government is to protect its citizens, both from outside attackers and from domestic threats like bank robbers. Of course, our Constitution says in the very beginning why we want to establish a government, to have a more perfect union, more perfect than the previous government, and work out very well. To have justice, to ensure domestic tranquility. Domestic means at home. We want peace at home. To provide for the common defense against outside attackers, to promote the general welfare. And the concept of modern welfare is not invented back then. This just means to help people have good lives, not necessarily by giving them money, but by leaving them alone. And then lastly, to bring liberty to ourselves and to future generations. That is why we are establishing this government. The 1849 gold rush in California is a great example of what happens when there is no effective government. There were so many people rushing out to California that it took a while for the government to catch up and to effectively work in California. So the first guy who found gold on his property unfortunately made almost no money from that because people just came in and took his land. They're called squatters. People just show up on his land and take his gold. They don't pay him. They don't pay rent. They won't leave. Not good. A term for that was claim jumpers, where one person stakes out a claim, literally with stakes, along the edges of his property or so-called property, and someone else just comes in and mines for gold in that area. The prices in your book, take a look at the prices for individual things. Absolutely insane how high prices were, because getting them from, say, St. Louis, Missouri, all the way out to California was insanely difficult. It would take months, literally all summer long, to go from Missouri to California overland. If you've ever played the Oregon Trail, that's really fun, and that shows you the difficulties. It was about as easy to go on a clipper ship from New York City all the way south of South America, all the way to San Francisco Bay, than it was to walk across half of the North American continent. It was just incredibly difficult to get out there and to get stuff out there. There was no real cash out there, very, very little, just whatever the miners took with them, which ran out very quickly. The people who were buying gold in California and bringing it to the rest of civilization, they claimed that it was very difficult to get gold out there, so they were paying very little for gold and making a lot of money themselves, really ripping off the miners. Murder was incredibly common. Theft of gold was incredibly common. Prostitution and gambling, very common. Alcoholism, drunkenness, all sorts of problems, and the government was pretty much non-existent. So what happens when there is a problem? How does that mini society deal with it? Well, almost entirely by vigilantism, where commoners, just regular old people, take the law into their own hands. Batman is awesome in the comics and movies, but he would not work in real life. He is not authorized by society to do what he does. He does not have the right to stop these criminals in the way that he does. He is as much a criminal as everyone else. One reason why we don't like vigilante justice is that the vigilantes often have a conflict of interest. They definitely have a stake in the game, so they are biased, and they don't know all the information. They don't have a reason to investigate. They just are angry and they want someone to pay, and so they find someone and make him pay, whether or not they actually did the thing. When you kill someone, it's called murder. When the government kills someone, it's called justice, an execution, because you do not have the authority to do that. Imagine what would happen if Batman was wrong a single time. Just one time, and he beat someone up so terribly he's in the hospital for months. Just one time he does that wrong. That would cause chaos in a real world. And unfortunately, in the gold rush days, justice usually meant hanging or shooting someone in the back. There were no jails. So there's not a lot you can do when someone ticks you off. What can you do besides kill them? Or beat them up? Eventually, society did grow and did form some type of government. By late 1849, they did become an official territory of the United States, and to do that, they had to make a constitution and have a limited form of self-government. And then only about a year later, in late 1850, they became a state. So now they can have a governor, they can have a state legislator, they can have sheriffs, they can have policemen, that sort of thing. And, things did get better. Anarchy does not work very well, and really no one likes anarchy. Living without any government is scary. There are no cops to protect you. There are no laws to protect you. And that is not a good way to live. You always have to watch your back. Now, the free market is protected with policemen, with laws. There's order. There's no chaos. Order is good for business. Chaos is terrible for business. The government is in charge of protecting both the buyers and the sellers. It's in charge of protecting the market. And I think that a lot of modern day politicians have this false dichotomy saying, I either have to be for the people or for the businesses. Well, people and businesses need each other. Businesses have to sell to the people. The people have to buy everything from businesses. So what helps one really ought to help the other. If you are hurting one, you are hurting the other. It's like being glad that the other side of the ship is sinking. No, we're all in the same ship together. We're all in the same economy together. If you destroy businesses, well, where will people work? And where will people buy their things? You can't hurt businesses without hurting the people that work there. A lot of people are saying that we ought to support local business and not the big guys, which, I get that. But, Walmart hires local people, right? If Walmart is hurting, I don't think Walmart's going to go out of business because of COVID-19. But if it starts hurting a little bit, then they might have to lay off people. And who are they laying off? Your neighbors. So, there is really no good distinction between people and businesses. The government has to protect both equally. How does the government protect the free market? Well, when there's a cheater, when there's a thief, when there's a murderer, you put them in jail. You use the law to undo that wrong. When you make a contract and someone doesn't want to hold up their end of the bargain, the government can step in and enforce that contract. Both Plato and Adam Smith, who famously wrote The Wealth of Nations, they wanted a very limited government in the economic arena. They wanted the government to just stay out of economics almost completely and leave that to professional economists. There wasn't really a job like an economist back in Plato's day, but he said, leave to the merchants. Let the businessmen decide what the economy should look like. They're the ones who know about the economy. Unfortunately, you can't just let people do whatever they want. And if you have no oversight over any area of human life, well, then people will do what they want, and what they want to do is sin. When I was a child and I read Judges, one theme of Judges is everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And as a child, I was like, oh, good for them. Everyone's doing what they think is right. That's nice. Well, unfortunately, what they thought was right was idol worshiping and human sacrifice and adultery and all sorts of evil wickedness. We can't do whatever we want to do. That's not right. So sometimes the government does have to step in and say, whoa, 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 big business. That is not fair for society. How does the government involve itself in the economy? There's lots of different ways. There's a big long list in your book, and not all of these are true of the American government. One way is by controlling the supply of money, by printing money, by controlling how much is lent, by granting patents and copyrights, trying to protect your intellectual property, which encourages people to write things and invent things because they know they can make money off of that. They can sometimes create monopolies. America doesn't really do that anymore. We believe that monopolies are bad for business all around, but we used to in early American days. By taxing imports and or exports with tariffs, trying to make people buy American rather than buy foreign aid goods. The government can encourage some industries by giving subsidies. Subsidies is basically just free cash because we like your business. You can get a lot of political points by supporting farmers in America, even though farming is a very small part of the American economy. Americans like the concept of farming. So if the government promises to give millions of dollars to farmers, that usually makes a lot of Americans pretty happy. I don't know. I guess farming is just part of the American ethos. The government also discourages other businesses with high taxes. This is a New Zealand picture of how much cigarette cost, about $4 a pack, versus how much taxes. I don't know what the GST tax is, but that's $2 in taxes. That's about 50% more money. And then 13 and a third dollars in excise tax. So, if it costs $4 to make, and it says and retail margin, so $4 is how much it costs to make plus profit. Instead of selling it for $4, they're selling it for $20 because there's 15 or so dollars in taxes. That should discourage people from smoking. That makes this pack of cigarettes almost $1 a cigarette. I've known people who smoke 2 packs a day. That is an incredibly expensive habit, not to mention anything else. Many governments regulate wages with some kind of minimum wage. Some governments have multiple minimum wages for different types of workers. Say if you work in this industry, the minimum wage is this. If you work in that industry, the minimum wage is something else. Many governments regulate prices as well. That's going one step further. Bread must be sold for $4 a loaf, whatever. Most governments have some kind of regulation on workplace conditions. You have to wear a hard hat. You have to wear gloves. You have to wash your hands every hour. Something like that. By regulating markets, deciding who can buy and sell where. In America, a classic example of this is a liquor license. If you want to sell alcohol, you must be approved by the government and buy this license. And there are multiple different types of liquor licenses. There are closed bottle, like selling in a grocery store, and then there's rules for restaurants, like selling open things. I know this because I had to take a class when I worked in a grocery store. One of those. The government can allocate scarce resources. If there's not enough to go around, they can decide where the resource goes to whom. I don't think it's a big deal in America. I do know that during the Cold War and World War II, when we were making the atomic bomb, we don't have all that much uranium, or we didn't at the time, and deciding which companies and which bomb makers get the nuclear resources, that was a big deal. Rationing hasn't happened in America since World War II, but other countries still do it. The government sometimes decides who works where. The Chinese government basically does this. They tell you what kind of job you may have, and there's very little hope of changing that. You can ask the government to change it, but good luck. Most government have some kind of central banking system. It just makes things much easier. That was a big controversy in early America. Andrew Jackson was completely against it. Many governments encourage technological development by hiring scientists. Many American breakthroughs have been made by government scientists. Barcodes were invented by NASA, and that has been huge help in the worldwide economy. Well, that was invented on the government dime. I believe Saran wrap was too. That's cool. Many governments control and change the environment for various reasons. The American government tries to reduce pollution. Now, I'm thankful that there's not poison in our air and water. In some places there still is. Here's a really sad story about the Russian government. This is Lake Baikal, which was one of the biggest lakes in the world. I believe it was in the top 10 largest lakes in the world. The government of Russia decided that they need more cotton. So they made all this surrounding area into cotton fields. And to do that, they diverted all these rivers to water the cotton fields. Okay, that's fine. But then the water is not going into Lake Baikal, and it dried up. From September 1989 to August 2009, you can see that this lake is dead. So now they have lots of cotton, but there were multiple very large fishing villages around this area that canned fish and sold it around the world. There was caviar production. There was a huge tourist industry just from yachting around the lake. It was real beautiful. There were campsites and things like that, and that's completely dead now. The little remaining water has tons of salt and chemicals in it that were really diluted by the huge lake, but are concentrated now. Not only that, but a lot of the salt from this lake just dried up, and now it's dust, and it's blowing in the wind, and it's destroying farmers' fields for miles around, and it's an absolute economic disaster caused by the government. Governments carry out projects that are too big for a single business to do by themselves. This is a picture of NASA scientists trying to get to the moon. It's pretty cool. Back in the day, there was no company that was able to go to the moon and go into space by themselves, so the government did it. I think it's really cool that today there are private companies that are bringing people into space, into the International Space Station. That's pretty cool. Governments regulate foreign trade and domestic trade, meaning trade between the states and provinces, things like that. Governments sometimes own businesses. Petro-Canada is Canada's second largest gas station company, and they are owned by the government of Canada. It's a very socialist idea. Sometimes governments take privately owned industries for the nation. That's called nationalizing. So back in the 70s, when Venezuela had a lot of oil, discovered that, the government decided that the oil would benefit the entire nation, so the government took it. And I don't think it's benefited the nation as much as it's benefited the dictators of Venezuela, but they call that nationalization. Governments often plan how much of what things are produced and or consumed. The American government doesn't really do that. That's good. Sometimes governments are involved in transferring income and property from one person or group to another. This is called the redistribution of wealth. All taxes do this to some extent. No one's taxed, the exact same amount of money, and not everyone benefits from different government programs the exact same way. But you can be very capitalist and not have much transfer of wealth. When you do it on purpose, you heavily, heavily tax the rich and give out all sorts of stuff to the poor. The most extreme example of this would be universal basic income, where you just give everyone a check just for living in your country. Macroeconomics is the study of the big parts of the economy. Macro means large. It's the nationwide impact of government. The government is much more concerned with macroeconomics, the big picture, rather than microeconomics, which is you and your personal finances. The government's decision greatly impacts their nation's economy. Even a decision to not do anything has a huge impact on the economy.